November 25th, 1854, New Orleans. The Whitmore plantation house blazed with lanterns. French violins sang over the fountain garden while the city whispered about the match. The planter's daughter, Eliza Whitmore, to Nathaniel Pike, a young sugar merchant whose fortunes were minted in blood but glittered like gold. The air smelled of clove and cane, the floors groaned under silk shoes and secrets. From the balconies hung tapestries embroidered with lions and initials. In the west parlor, the master toasted a legacy, his voice loud, his eyes glassy, his hands unaware they were already shaking. It was to be a triumph for a lineage fed by enslaved labor, a triumph soaked in perfume and prophecy. The Union promised wealth, new land, and heirs stamped in ivory. They called it a covenant of rising stars. But that day Samuel, scarred with seared W since boyhood, son of a hanged man and a woman who died in chains, stepped forward not as a servant, but as an executioner. He moved silent among the garlands, carrying trays with one hand and history with the other. The guests did not see the storm behind his eyes. Not yet. They would. At 10, Samuel was pressed with hot iron at the plantation gate. His mother's scream was short, muffled by the heel of a guard. His father, John, was already swinging from the oak, his shadow straining on the grass like it was trying to run. The iron hissed when it kissed Samuel's skin, branding a crooked W just below his collarbone. Whitmore property. His legs buckled. The pain didn't end. It calcified. He woke in the infirmary with gauze stuck to his chest, the taste of salt and metal in his mouth, an old woman whispering prayers in Gullah. Cora, that was her name. She had been born on Sapelo Island and stolen from it before she had a word for sky. She wrapped his wound with ash and crushed mint leaves and said, "That letter ain't yours. It's their fear. You belong to those who walked this ground before chains." He couldn't answer, couldn't cry, but something inside him answered. From that moment on, Samuel was marked, not just by the brand, but by the memory of the hanging tree, the silence of his mother's face, and the shape of the scar that throbbed whenever he was near the big house. His skin had become a registry, his breath a ledger. Every day he moved became a recording. Every silent nod, every lowered eye, every time he fetched water or chopped wood or held back a scream, a page. And he remembered, not in words, in the weight of the tray, in the way Cora ground herbs with the base of her palm, in how the overseer held his cane not to walk but to threaten. He remembered in smells, lard on iron, sweat on silk, the musty scent of cotton still warm from the field. These were his lessons. In time, Samuel learned to walk without being seen. He moved like breath, uncounted, unnoticed, always present. He served at the edge of the room. He ladled soup without spilling. He touched nothing that left fingerprints. But behind his stillness was a forge, one that never cooled. His education was built from scraps, a map of overheard conversations and stolen glances. From the Whitmore's library, he filched a page once, tucked into the heel of his boot, a slave manifest, list of names and ages, crossed out or reassigned like livestock. His mother's name was there. So was his. But his father's? Erased. He didn't sleep the night. He found it. He watched the moon scrawl shapes on the dirt floor of the quarters. He held the paper like a bone pulled from a grave, and then he folded it until it vanished beneath the lining of his shirt, where it would stay for years. He was 12 when he first heard the name Nathaniel Pike. Pike was younger then, just another man in Havana buying bodies. But his name was spoken in low tones, a trader who dealt in rare flesh, who promised obedience with a tincture and a lash. Samuel heard it from the dockhands, from the drunk overseer whose tongue loosened with rum. When Pike's name came up again 10 years later, it was different. This time, it was attached to a courtship. The master was giddy with talk of alliances. The daughter, Eliza, watched from her window with a gaze Samuel never forgot. Pale, dry-eyed, her expression held none of her father's triumph. Only calculation. Only distance. Eliza Whitmore had never spoken to Samuel, but she had studied him. She was 7 when she watched his punishment for stealing a biscuit. She hadn't looked away. She was 13 when she passed him in the hallway, glanced at his scar, and said, simply, "That must have hurt." He hadn't replied. That silence became their only conversation. Now she was 20, and she would marry a man who trafficked flesh like wine, a man whose name had been whispered in markets, prayed against in slave cabins. Samuel knew the shape of such men, the curl of their lips, the gleam in their boots. The night the engagement was announced, there was music, musicians from Paris, flown in for the occasion. Servants wore white gloves. The sugar was poured in sculptures shaped like flowers. Samuel carried flutes of champagne between couples who twirled and never looked down. But every footfall pressed deeper into his vow. He did not smile. He did not fumble. He did not drink. But his heart counted the minutes, and the scar beneath his collar burned. At the edge of the garden stood the old oak. Black bark, knotted limbs. No rope now, but the shape of one still lingered in the bend of its arms. Samuel stood there once more. His breath was even, his eyes open, his hand at his side. Beneath the soil near the roots was a tin box rusted with time. He opened it. Inside, a knife wrapped in cloth, the handle worn, the blade notched. It had belonged to his father. He unwrapped it, touched it. The valve stirred. The mark pulsed. And Samuel whispered, just once, "Not yours. Not anymore." Samuel grew in silence. Not the silence of peace, but of calculation, the kind forged in basements, between walls, behind eyes that learned to weep without wetness. In the Whitmore estate, silence was a skill, a way to survive long enough to remember. And Samuel remembered everything. He remembered the weight of chains, the groan of the cellar door, the smell of rum casks stacked above shackles, the rasp of Eliza's voice when she practiced the piano, the names of every man who laughed when a woman was whipped. He remembered which guests took too much wine, which ones asked for special punishments in the cane fields. He remembered which hallways creaked, which keys were left unattended. The docks became his second tutor. There, amid the heat thick with cane juice and sweat, Samuel moved crates and listened. Merchants spoke openly when they thought no one heard. He learned about shipments of flesh disguised as produce, about markets not listed in any paper, about coins stamped in Madrid, but soaked in Caribbean blood. He watched them all, and said nothing. Eliza Whitmore came and went in silks and parasols. Her face never changed, only grew paler. Her eyes no longer curious, but cold. She did not speak to him. She did not speak to anyone unless required. She became a portrait before she was even wed. And still, Samuel watched. Cora aged into bone and ash. Her hands trembled, but her voice never did. She passed him vials, powders, whispers. "This root brings fever," she'd say. "This one brings dreams. This one, silence." He took them all, studied them, crushed them between stones, boiled them in water, tested them on rats behind the smokehouse, measured doses by the way their breathing failed. He carved a garden where no overseer looked. Behind the slave quarters, beyond the cane, among the refuse, he planted nightshade, hemlock, oleander. He watched them grow with reverence, not for death, but for justice. These were his sermons. The others called him quiet. They said he was touched by spirits. They left him alone. He preferred it, because in that space, where no one asked and no one judged, he became something else. Not a man, not yet a legend, a blade still being forged. The day he turned 20, he found a folded page beneath his cot, a map, not of land, but of rooms. The Whitmore estate, sketched from memory, cellar, larder, library, vault, and a red mark in the west wing, Eliza's chamber. He didn't know who left it, but he knew why. The wind had shifted. When Nathaniel Pike arrived, the shift became a storm. Pike came with 10 trunks. 7 were opened. Inside, velvet coats, ivory combs, books in French. The other 3 he did not open. Samuel did. Not in daylight. Not in front of anyone. He unlatched them in the stables. Inside, collars. Chains. 2 iron masks. A journal listing cargo from Cuba. Names, numbers, weights. Underneath, a ledger planned acquisitions. More bodies. He closed the trunks, stood still, let the heat rise in his throat and settle into a scar. The W burned. That night, The house gleamed with candles. Pike smiled too much. Eliza barely did. She moved like a ghost rehearsing a part she could not forget. Samuel saw her pause at the top of the stairs. Her hand trembled. Her eyes rimmed in red. She stood beside Pike at dinner. He raised his glass. The master beamed. The guests roared. And she did not drink. Her lips moved, not in prayer, in warning. Samuel was in the shadows, holding a tray, watching. Later, near midnight, he found her in the empty sitting room, alone, still in her gown. She stared at the piano. Her hands rested on the keys, but did not play. He entered without sound. She did not turn, only said, "I wept once. They told me it spoiled my face." He said nothing. "He brings collars," she whispered. "My dowry is flesh." He stepped closer. "Why are you here?" she asked. His voice was a breath. "To remember." She turned to him, her face unreadable. "Then don't forget, none of this is holy." And then she left, her silk train hissing across the floor like a snake through dry leaves. At the oak tree, Samuel knelt. He placed a page from the trunk into the tin box beside the knife. He added a second item, a folded cloth holding Cora's powder, fever root. Then, under moonlight, he began to hum. Not a hymn, not a prayer, a rhythm older than chains, the kind that calls wolves from hiding. In the cellar the next day, he touched every bottle of wine, all but one. That one he opened, and into it, the powder. It was the master's favorite vintage. He sealed it, cleaned the lip, polished the glass, placed it back. When the cork was drawn after the vows, it would smell like plum and oak, but it would carry the truth of the field, the wound, the vow. Samuel waited, silent, invisible, and the knife slept no longer. Nathaniel Pike arrived on the eve of the wedding like a merchant of empire. Polished boots, cane tipped with silver, a smile that had no roots. His carriage bore a sigil not seen in Louisiana, but known on the islands, a serpent eating its tail. The staff bowed. The master clapped his back. The daughter did not move. 10 trunks followed Pike into the West Wing. 7 for clothes, colognes, contracts. 3 were locked. Samuel opened one. Inside were instruments, iron collars of Cuban make, their hinges rusted with old screams, a branding rod, chains laced with barbs, ledger pages pinned with red wax, names, weights, destinations. He closed it, not from fear, from knowing. This union was no marriage. It was a merger, flesh for fortune, a blood contract stitched in lace. By nightfall, the house had shifted. Walls seemed to sweat. Servants walked quieter. Eliza vanished into her chamber. Her silhouette, seen once against the balcony curtain, stood unmoving for an hour. Samuel lit the East Hall candles, passed by her door, heard nothing, not weeping, not breath, just the stillness of a woman trying not to shatter. Below, in the dining room, Pike dined with the master. They spoke in codes. Shipments, shares, Havana, iron. Samuel poured wine, heard each word, filed it into the ledger of his ribs. "You handle discipline?" Pike asked. The master chuckled. "Only when necessary. But the girl, she'll keep them in order. She has a mind for inventory." "As she should." Pike nodded. "She'll be mine soon." The words hung like musk. Samuel did not flinch. He moved to the parlor, cleaned ash from a fireplace, tended the silver, placed the poison bottle alone on a separate tray. Upstairs, Eliza stared at her reflection. She wore the dress already. It glowed white under gaslight, thick with pearls, but her eyes were storms. She sat, picked up a letter, unfolded it, read once, twice, then burned it in a dish. The ashes curled like the tails of dead rats. She watched them without blinking. Samuel entered the servants' stairwell. Emerging near the master bedroom, in the linen closet, he found a box long untouched. Household records, birth ledgers, lists of purchases. He opened the last book. The pages yellowed, brittle. On page 34, the name, John, age 26. Purchased 1832. Beside it, in red, hung. Next line, Sarah, sold, died. Then, Samuel, born 1844, marked 1854. The ink was faded, but the memory was fire. He tore the page. The next morning dawned red, the kind of sky sailors fear. Wind tangled the moss on the oaks. Guests arrived in carriages, their wheels carving the drive like scalpels. Laughter, lace, parfum. No one saw the rot. Inside, Eliza dressed without assistance. She fastened her own buttons, tied her own corset. Her hands did not tremble. She pinned her hair high, left her throat bare. A single pendant hung above her heart, an opal set in gold. Her mother's. Below, the hall transformed. Drapes of silk, garlands of orange blossom, a string quartet tuning. Samuel laid out the silverware, one knife askew. Deliberate, just enough. Pike entered last. His suit shone, his hair slicked. His eyes gleamed with a hunger of ownership. He smelled of tobacco and sweat sweetened by cologne. He kissed the master's ring. Guests whispered. Daughters envied. Sons watched. Eliza descended like a statue, remembering how to walk. No music played, only the murmur of breath. They stood together. The priest read Latin. The master beamed. Samuel waited in the wings. The toast came. "To the future," cried Pike. Samuel stepped forward. The bottle opened with a soft pop. The liquid poured ruby. Pike drank first. He paused. A blink, a shiver, a smile, then a stumble. Laughter, then silence. Eliza turned to him. Her hand rested on his arm. Her smile was carved. Then Pike fell, convulsed. Guests gasped. The priest stepped back. The master rose. Samuel stepped forward, drew the knife from the tray, the one from the oak. He moved fast. The blade sank deep into Pike's chest. A fountain of red. Screams. Then Eliza, her eyes locked on Samuel's, nodded. He turned the blade. She leaned into it. It found her throat. White turned crimson. She did not fall. She folded. The music had stopped. Only the knife spoke now. Samuel dropped it, raised both hands. The blood ran to his elbows. Not a servant, not a guest. The executioner had arrived, and the house of Whitmore had heard his vow. The house did not sleep. Not after that. The wine still stained the rug in the parlor. The priest's book lay on its spine, open to a prayer no longer fitting. Eliza's body had been taken to the upper chamber. Her gown, soaked and clinging, marked a path up the stair. Pike's corpse remained. No one dared move it. But Samuel moved. He moved through silence. The kind of silence born not from reverence, but from confusion. The guests had fled to corners. Some wept. Others whispered about devilry, madness, revolt. The master had locked himself in the study. Samuel moved past them like a shadow claiming its shape, down to the cellar. There, beneath the mansion, history lay stacked like firewood. Casks of rum, barrels of cane, racks of wine, aged, labeled, cataloged. But more than that, boxes of ledgers, contracts, manifests, birth records, death notes, purchase slips, every line a name traded like coin. Samuel lit a lamp, set it on a hook. Its light pooled across the floor like blood across tile. He found the ledger from 1822, the year his grandmother was sold. Then 1832, his father's name. Then 1844, his own. Each line written in the master's hand or that of the steward. He opened the wine casks. Smashed one. Let it bleed. The scent of fermented wealth flooded the room. From his pocket, he drew a small pouch. Cora's final gift. Dry herbs ground to dust, black as iron. Fever root, belladonna, powdered bark. He poured it over the papers. Thick, slow, like blessing a grave. Then kerosene. From a flask he had hidden behind the grain barrels weeks ago. He soaked the edges of the shelves. Then he stood back, held the flame to the corner of the master's first ledger. Paper flashed like a promise, finally kept. Fire climbed. Samuel did not blink. He turned, climbed the stairs. Behind him, smoke licked the walls. Ash followed. In the hall above, chaos bloomed. Guests fled through the gardens. The master burst from his study, coughing, shouting orders no one obeyed. Samuel walked straight. The house had been a monument, a prison. Now it burned. He passed the kitchen. Flames already reached the ceiling. The cook screamed. The butler collapsed in prayer. No one stopped him. In the drawing room, portraits burned. The Whitmore patriarchs, immortal in oil and canvas, melted into streaks of black and red. The piano cracked from heat. A string snapped with a sound like a scream. Samuel reached the front door. It swung open. The night breathed. Outside, the sky was heavy with smoke. The oak tree stood lit by moonlight. The guests huddled far from the house. As if distance would cleanse them, he stepped out. Someone shouted, "There!" Soldiers, called by a guest. Their rifles raised. Samuel stopped. The fire behind him roared, silhouetting him in light. His scar, the seared W, caught the glow. He did not lift his hands. He did not kneel. The captain hesitated. A guest whispered. He killed the groom, the bride. But no one stepped forward. Samuel stared at them, not in challenge, in judgment. And then he turned, not to run, but to walk, into the cane. His back did not bend. His steps did not rush. The field swallowed him like a mother reclaiming her child. Behind, the house cracked. A wall fell. The roof moaned. Flames reached the sky. And the name Whitmore began to die. No one remembered the vows. Not the words. Not the prayer. Not the kiss. What they remembered was a scream. Sharp, sudden, and then silence, so loud it flattened the breath of every man and woman in the hall. Eliza bled like a statue cracked open. Pike convulsed, eyes wide as if trying to escape his own skull. And Samuel, whose hands had once been taught only to serve, stood soaked in justice. The master tried to rise. The priest tried to speak. But neither knew what to do with a blade that had just rewritten the rules of the room. Samuel did not move. Blood dripped from his knuckles onto the floorboards. It pooled into the cracks. The blade fell with a sound that rang too long. Guests scattered. Dresses tore. Chairs fell. Some fled to the front. Others pushed through the kitchen. Only one remained still. The mistress of linens, face pale, lips parted, hands trembling over her apron. She knew. She had always known. Outside, the horses neighed. The wind caught the drapes and pulled them like wings trying to lift. The smoke was coming now, curling up the stairwell, slinking through corridors. In the west wing, the floor cracked. A chandelier shook. Samuel stepped over Pike's body, bent to Eliza, touched her cheek once. "You chose," he whispered. Then he stood. The blood on his shirt marked a shape almost holy. He passed through the hall as the fire reached the ceiling. The paint bubbled. The wainscot split. From the drawing room, flames licked portraits. Faces turned to ash. He opened the vault behind the library, where contracts were sealed and legacies hid. He pulled every scroll, every document, every stamped paper of flesh bought and sold. He fed them to the fire, one by name. From the garden, screams rose. Servants fled with children. Guests wailed. Somewhere, someone shouted for water. But the well was dry, had been dry for years. Samuel moved through the house like breath through bone. Not a ghost, not a man, a consequence. In the music room, the violinist's chair was overturned. Strings charred, bow broken. Sheet music fluttered like burning birds. The master appeared then, stumbling from the parlor, face gray with soot, eyes wild. "You," he roared, "you'll swing for this." Samuel looked at him, truly looked. The man was smaller now, no longer a god in his own house, just flesh wrapped in fear. "My father did," Samuel said. "Now it's your turn." The master lunged. Samuel stepped aside. The old man tripped, hit the pillar, crumpled. Samuel walked past him. The grand clock struck once, then stopped. Outside, night deepened. The cane fields glowed. Behind him, the house gave its final moan. A beam fell. Sparks filled the sky. Samuel did not run. He stepped into the garden, bare feet, soaking earth. The guests had fled to the drive. Some sobbed, some cursed. None approached. Only one voice rose. "What is he?" No one answered. Samuel walked past them. Not fast, not slow, a march measured by memory. He reached the gate, stopped, turned, and spoke, not as property, as a man. Then he vanished into the dark. The fire burned until dawn, and the wedding became a burial. By the time the sun considered rising, the Whitmore house had become a cathedral of cinders. Flames raged upward through beams that once held slave registers and bridal portraits. Windows burst, sending glass like jagged tears into rose beds. The sky above New Orleans glowed a deep copper, as if the city itself mourned with flame. And still Samuel walked. He moved with smoke in his hair and soot on his tongue, his body a script no master had written. Behind him, fire wrote new names across the Whitmore walls. Names once whispered in chains now shouted in ash. Eliza, John, Sarah, Samuel. In the east wing, the nursery collapsed first. No children had slept there in years, only lace and legacy. Still, the wooden rocking horse burned last, as if waiting for someone it had never met. In the west, the master's study succumbed slowest. Its books ignited page by page, reluctant prophets finally set free. The globe cracked open, the bourbon boiled in its crystal cage, and the chair, where men had been priced and daughters sold into silence, split down the spine. Samuel passed the kitchen one last time. The iron stove groaned and ruptured. Flames reached into the pantry where spices from Africa and India had sat beside shackles. Everything tasted of smoke now. He stopped only once, at the hearth where his mother had scrubbed blood from the floor after a punishment no one remembered but him. He knelt, pressed his palm to the stones, closed his eyes. Listen, the fire behind him roared, but it could not compete with the silence inside him. Then he stood. The front doors, tall and carved from cypress older than the state, buckled. With a groan, they crashed inward, revealing the inferno to the gardens. Guests, soldiers, and servants alike stared. No one moved, until soldiers shouted, "He's still inside!" Rifles raised, orders barked, but no one fired, because Samuel emerged, alive, unbent, a man stitched from memory and flame. He stepped over marble, through smoke. The fire behind him cast his shadow long against the dew-wet lawn. He did not run. He did not hide. He walked to the oak, the same oak where his father had swung. The noose was gone, but the limb remembered. Samuel touched its bark. In his other hand, he held the master's final ledger, half-burned, edges blackened. He opened it, found the line with his name, tore it out. Then, slowly, deliberately, he tore out every page. The paper scattered like ash. Wind caught it, lifted it. Some flew into the fire. Some flew into the fields. Names no longer contained. Samuel turned, faced the crowd. Blood still marked his arms. Smoke rimmed his eyes. He spoke once to no one and everyone. This is the end of the counting. Then he walked past the soldiers. None moved. He passed through the gate, down the road, toward the cane. His bare feet left prints in the soot. One by one, figures emerged behind him. A young girl, her hands clenched. An old man with a limp. A woman carrying her child. Then more, and more. A line of memory. A procession of the uncounted. The Whitmore house burned behind them. A monument to forgetting undone. The fire climbed higher, touched the weather vane, a lion holding a whip, and twisted it into a question. By morning, only the oak remained, and in its roots, smoke curled like a prayer long denied. By dawn, the mansion was a carcass. The Whitmore estate, a name stitched into deeds, debts, and flesh, now smoldered like a verdict. Black smoke curled above the ruins, thick with the scent of roasted sugar and centuries of silence. Samuel stood barefoot in the cinders, his scar glowing ruddy with first light. Ash clung to his skin. Behind him, only ruins. Soldiers arrived at midday. Their boots stirred char and memory, but none dared fire. He did not raise his hands. He did not run. He waited. They saw what he was. Not a man fleeing judgment, but one who had delivered it. A few stepped back. One dropped his rifle. Another crossed himself. Survivors whispered of a ghost with a knife. But ghosts do not leave footprints. Samuel did. Into the cane he walked, slow, silent. Behind him, others followed, some barefoot, some bleeding, all remembering. The house was gone. The name had burned, but the memory would not. That was the true fire, and it had just begun.